So, in the next 15 weeks, we will be looking at the econometrics problems. But before that, we need to understand what econometrics is all about. Now, economic theory postulates an idea. Okay, for example, economic theory tells us that the price of a commodity determines the quantity of the commodity bought. So, these are related to each other. Now, mathematical economics tells us that the relationship is downward sloping, that if price increases, in most cases the quantity demanded of the commodity would be decreasing. So, this is what mathematical economics do, and they also tells us the type of curve that we can expect. Maybe it will be a straight line or maybe a quadratic function, but we are not specific about what the straight line would look like. So, there can be an infinite number of downward sloping straight lines. So, suppose it is a straight line. How do you identify the straight line? To do that, we need some data. So, what do? You look at different price situations and you look at the quantity demanded for each of these situations. So, we get several pairs of observations. Unfortunately, if you plot this, you will find that they do not lie on a straight line, although the theory tells you so. So, is the theory wrong? Probably not. We can check for this, because what we assume always is that when we are looking at the quantity demanded given a price, everything else remains constant. But when you actually collect the data, you cannot control for the other variables, for example, income, for example, prices of other commodities. So, what happens is that these changes in the other variables which are not in the model actually affects the model. So, there would be some errors involved. So, what we now have is a econometric problem, in the sense that the relationship has an error. So, we get, let us take it simply, quantity demanded is a linear function of price plus some error or random quantity. And as soon as this error comes in, the next question is, how do you estimate the parameters of this model, and that is where statistics comes in. So, econometrics primarily is the application of statistical tools to economic data or economic models. Now, let us come to this from another point of view. There are several statistical tools, well established tools. So, what is new in application of the statistical tools to economic data? Actually, what happened was statistics developed on the basis of experimental data, primarily natural science data, astronomical data, etc. In those situations, the regularity conditions that we assume in statistical models hold. For example, we can conduct an experiment given everything else is constant if you are doing this in a laboratory. But when we do a field experiment, it becomes much more difficult, because we are not able to control the other variables. And in economics, this becomes much more severe, because we obviously are not able to control human behavior. So, the assumptions that we make in the usual statistical models are very often invalid, and hence we need to innovate on these models. We will be using the same models, but we will need to innovate on the models, because the assumptions will not be valid, and in that case we will not get good inferences from this. So, the problem is, how do you get good inferences from a given problem, given a model, standard model, where the assumptions are not valid? That is what econometrics would be looking into. But then econometrics, we believe, is a slightly narrow name for a much broader subject. This is because this sort of problems will arise not only from economic data, but from any other social science data as well. Because in social science, this Data generally depends on human behavior, which is very hard to control. Economics is one of the major areas in social sciences and one of the most developed of the social sciences. And since these problems arose from economics, we call it econometrics. But what I want to tell you is that these methods are equally applicable to other developing social science areas. So, do not take it as only related to economics. Look at it from a broader perspective, where when you model or do a statistical model, the usual assumptions are not valid and you need to take care of methods by which you can get efficient inferences on the basis of data generated from experiments which do not take control of all exogenous variables.